What's up, fellas? Today we're starting, I guess, another series on the channel. So we're doing a Q&A with me and my little brother Max, who is also a good lifter. I realized that I've gotten the bulk of my subscribers after the last time Max was on the channel. So Max is going to give a brief introduction to himself, kind of what he's accomplished as a lifter. And then we're going to get into the questions that we got off of his Instagram and then a couple of the ones from the YouTube, depending on how we're doing time-wise. So,
hi, I'm Max. I'm Sam's little brother and number one protege. I've been lifting for around 7 years. My best lifts are a 727 sleeve squat, a 447 bench press and comp, and then a 771 deadlift and comp for a 1945 total. I'm currently prepping for a USAPL meet where I'm hoping to chip some of the American records. I'm 19 and compete in the 308 class.
Yeah, the newly created 308 class in the USAPL.
With some free records, baby.
Yeah, because it was a bit of an issue, right? Because the USPA tested division, as much as I like the USPA, they don't test for SARMs, so it's not really drug-tested powerlifting at that point because, contrary to what some people will tell you, SARMs are in fact a PED, and they also do work. So to say that you're in a drug-tested division where you're free to run as much SARMs as you want, not really a level playing field, so that kind of wasn't a great option for Max, although it was what we did. But now that the USAPL is separated from the IPF, and we reverted back to the traditional weight classes, then someone Max's size actually has a class, because we've been dealing with this issue for a while. Max won USAPL Nationals in the Team 3 division for the 120 kilo a couple years ago when it was in our home state of Washington, because we don't really have the time or resources to travel much further than that. So when it was in our home state, Max entered, Max won. And soon after that, Max got to the point where he'd either be having to make a sizable cut to 264, or he would be having to compete as the world's most undersized super heavyweight. So he was kind of left in a no man's land of large natural people that now kind of has more options as to what to do. So we're going to get into the questions that you guys asked us. I think the plan is to make these Q&As with me and Max a little bit more informal. Max is a very good lifter, but Max also isn't the most technically minded coach in the world. So we'll leave the little bit more technical programming questions for the questions videos that I do by myself. This is more kind of kicking the shit. We're gonna debate after this what the name of the series is going to be, because Foad Abiyad stole Bro Chat, which I believe we have a better claim to as we're actually brothers. But we're gonna get into the questions. We'll leave these ones a little bit more informal. So if you got more bullshit type questions, more stupid shit, this is the series for those.
All right. What are the biggest goals for 2022, both in and out of training?
Suggesting we have out of training goals.
We're buying a house. That's a major goal that we're going to accomplish early in 2022.
Hopefully not fuck that up.
Building a nice home gym. Excited for some basement deadlifts again. That's a big one. I'm very amped for that. The training ones, more importantly. I usually don't like saying training goals out loud because it feels stupid. Because when I fail, or if I do fail, I feel like I spoke about something that I wasn't about. But I will say, because I think this is a goal that I've had for long enough and I'm very serious about it, I want to pull 800 before I turn 20 in competition. We've been prepping for that for coming up on like 9 months now. We're doing 3 back-to-back meets to try and like build up to that. Outside of that, I have other goals, but that is really like a quintessential one. I've been lifting for coming up on 7 years, and when I first started when I was 13, I saw Eric's pull. And
Eric Lillybridge, by the way.
Eric Lillybridge pulled 800 at 18, but it was on pound plates, but it's still considered the like current record for a teenager. And I've had my eye on that for many years, and that's a very, very big one for me. Those are my major goals right now.
And also, so he's got one last meet that he's doing that'll be a USPA meet, so we get to use a deadlift bar in an attempt to pull that 804, which I think is like the upper ends of what Max is going to be capable of in that amount of time, which I think is part of the reason that's like, it's a fun goal because it's kind of a, I want to see if I can do this type goal, not a, I'm going to go do something I already know I can do. And the same meet, the goal will be to also lock in a 2K total for him before turning 20. For myself, no, don't really have any concrete competition plans yet. I would like to start finding comps that aren't super far away for strongman that will give me my nationals qualification, so that way I can start getting in the rotation of doing nationals for strongman each year, start working my way towards a pro card eventually, right? That would be super cool. Not that I'm even remotely close, but you got to start getting the competition experience somewhere. Aside from that, I believe that I am capable and would like to bench. I want to bench 6 plates this year. I believe that's within my capabilities. My current PR is 555. So 30 pounds in a year would definitely be one of the better years I've had of recent, but it's not completely out of line with my progression over the last 2 years, especially if I do pack on some weight. I'm hoping that, getting a nice home gym locked in will be able to push the training intensity without being embarrassed, right? Because getting fired up, hitting yourself in the head a little bit is not such a cool thing to do when there is a general fitness class going on two feet away from you, or like an Alzheimer's boxing class. It's like me and Max always make fun of the people on Instagram who have people in the background. They're like, oh, they're all Myron. They're staring at me. And just people glaring at them for dropping their deadlifts.
I could make some very cool Myron deadlift compilations from when I was 15 and would scream at the YMCA.
Yeah,
I could make some dope ones. A lot of YMCA moms looking very concerned when I'm throwing plates down because they're so impressed.
So that, I think that we'll see a big uptick in progress for both Max and I when we get to train in a home gym that's well equipped, right? So we don't have to compromise our workouts at all, but really get to push that training intensity, which historically has always led to good results for both him and I, so long as we do it in a way that's intelligent and doesn't leave us injured, which is super cool. As far as the squat, don't really know. I would like to do like a 750 SSB and then start cracking away on getting towards 800 on the straight bar once I do that. But that certainly I don't think will be a goal for this year. I don't think that would be a realistically selected goal. And then I would like to pull 800 on a stiff bar and like 830 on a deadlift bar this year. I think those are well-selected, realistic goals for 1 year at my level. The one I don't have a fucking clue on is this. I'm over pressing 405 this year. Write it down. Those are the goals. I don't really know. They're not as concrete as Max's. Just trying to get stronger muscles. So what is the next question?
Really quick, I'm going to bench 5 in 2022. Mark my words.
It'll happen.
That's so ambitious.
It'll happen.
Extremely ambitious.
It's going to happen. You finally learned how to bench.
For outside of training goals, Sam wants to grow the YouTube channel and put out quality content. Subscribe.
No, I want to make money.
What is your favorite exercise?
Depends on what's going good.
I'm going right now deadlifts. It's kind of always been the favorite. I don't know if it's a little bit of a cyclical loop in terms of I like it because I'm good at it, and I'm good at it because I like it. I think I've previously put too much emphasis on it because I liked it and I like old Pete Rubish deadlift videos. But yeah, it's always got a spot in my heart for deadlifts.
Tricep press downs.
Which is why he's so good at bench press. That's why he's so good at all right. For Max, how has implementing weighted pull-ups helped with the strength development? How has he programmed weighted pull-ups into his normal weightlifting regime?
As far as how we did them, super simple. Just after our deadlift day, working up to one top set, back down set. Super simple, just trying to beat the books when we can. Try to hold the motion pretty accountable for not breaking down our technique as it gets heavier. Just trying to keep them somewhat standardized. Not really building much volume, just applying intensity because Max is a strong guy. Just introducing a new motion and applying some effort. The volume doesn't necessarily need to be progressed to see progression, as we've seen, because he's gotten up to a plate at 300 pounds body weight for five reps, which is pretty good. I'll let Max answer, but my observation as his coach would be that it's gone really well. Max's upper back strength has come tremendously far over the last 2 training cycles or so. And I would attribute that half to the pull-ups, maybe, probably a little bit less than half, and then more of the half to Yates rows and really locking in the form on those, which Max for the longest time never got anything out of barbell rows. It would never do anything. It would just be extra taxing without any necessarily carry over to any specific lift. But that's because we probably didn't stick with any one long enough to master them. And I decided that Max was going to stick out Yates rows for a while, and it was probably useless for almost a full training cycle. And then he finally started to get them to click, kind of found what weight range is the heaviest you can go while still getting some mind-muscle connection. And then suddenly it really started to show up in how he pulls. So I would say that they've been helpful, but not quite as helpful as the Yates rows. Definitely, it's been a good staple of bringing up Max's upper back strength, though.
Yeah, to harp on what Sam was saying, the Yates rows have been like a real game changer. The pull-ups have been cool. I definitely am pretty invested in pushing them just because I think having like good pull-ups as a larger dude is like an impressive feat. And so I think being invested in them is good because it's like driven me to try and like push them harder because like I really wanted to do like a plate for a couple reps. So that was like kind of a cool feat. I don't know if there's anything special about them in terms of like being like a crazy movement that is the key to fixing like whatever. I would say Yates rows have been a lot more of like a game changer for me, but that's more so just having a consistent upper back movement that's like applicable to my deadlift. I will say I think I'm more invested in pull-ups just because I think they're cool, but I think any like vertical pulling movement for the lats is probably generally as good. I just think they're like a nice variation.
Cool.
How long are your sessions and what does it comprise of other than actual lifting?
Sitting on a bench, looking at my phone. Aside from the lifting, that's most of what I do. Eating some intra-workout calories.
Sam eats like 4 Krispy Kremes.
Rice Krispie treats, much healthier.
He also eats Krispy Kreme.
Eating donuts while training is for fat bastards. I only eat Rice Krispie treats.
The lean man's option.
Yeah, for a real athlete. Let's see. It depends, right? So both Max and I can speak on Max's behalf on this one. It depends on where we're at in a training cycle. If it's early in a training cycle, like hour 15 can crank through a session. Like anywhere between an hour and a half early in the block. If the pacing is good, if we got nowhere to be, nothing else to do, that same session could be drawn out towards 2 hours if there's people we know at the gym. But we can crank through both of those early sessions, even on lower body, upper body. I find myself working my way through like early training cycle deadlift days insanely quickly. Then getting later in the block when there's more warm-ups to take, we're really trying to optimize our technique, really trying to maximize our performance on a couple of top sets. That can climb up to about 2.5 hours, I would say, for both of us. Any more than that, it's mostly just because we're not focusing well. But I would say that the most of like somewhat focused training is 2 to 2.5 hours. I would say that's pretty rare. I would say 2 hours is usually the upper end, but I'll put 2.5 in there just to cover my bases. What is that comprised of? Well, it's usually comprised of 1 to 2 main motions and then accessory motions that are focusing on hypertrophying the primary movers and or like stabilizing musculature. So, on a bench day, we might be doing a bit of benching, bit of pull downs, bit of overhead, bit of row, chest support rows, and then, either pecs, shoulders, triceps, hypertrophy focused work, something like that. Upper days usually looks like, lower days, right? Squat day might look like some like abs, some squats, some leg hypertrophy work, like a leg press, split squats, some ham curls, maybe an RDL in there. And I guess me and Max's deadlift days look pretty different, so we'll touch on that at some other time.
Also, a big one that Sam's leaving out is a warm-up walk is something that's not lifting related that we both do. To start off the day, we both walk on a treadmill for 10 minutes. 10. Yeah, usually about 10 minutes on a moderately high incline, just trying to break a sweat. I also think it like maintains some amount of like cardiovascular health as well as like a level that like I think translates to powerlifting. I don't think you need to be super overly fit, but just enough to like you're still recovering. I think going on a few walks and just starting off the day with one is pretty nice. Outside of that, if it's later in the week, I'll usually stretch. I'll like walk and then do some stretching just to make sure I can hit positions. I've noticed as I've gotten bigger, the need to stretch has gone up, and so I usually stretch the night before. And if I need it before I start taking the bar, I'll go out and stretch and then take more like specific warm-ups. Outside of that, if you get Sam talking at the gym, he does about 30 minutes of that a day. But those are the main things we do for training. All right.
Next one.
If it wasn't for powerlifting, what sport would you dominate in?
Well, if I wasn't powerlifting, I would certainly still be focused on combat sports. I just think that they're super interesting. I started out training for boxing. Just as I am in lifting, I was just a bit of a gym hero, not a competitive boxer. I like to believe, and most people who knew me back then who trained at the gym would vouch that much the same as lifting. I think I was good enough to be a pretty solid boxer, but got the same hang up about wanting to focus on getting better, not display where I'm at, and just ended up just being a gym hero, as is the Sheether way, or I guess this Sheether way, not this Sheether way. I love combat sports. I love boxing, as that's the one I'm familiar with. But I would love to have had the opportunity to learn some grappling, where strength is a little bit more relevant than it is in boxing. I think I would have had a great time with that. And when I ever downsize from lifting to try to not die, I think my incentive to lose weight and be okay with losing muscle and strength will be to take up some form of combat sport where being lighter is a competitive advantage compared to being like overly muscular. So that would be my way to trick myself into losing weight.
My pick, I guess, would be I threw shot put in high school for 2 years, and I got pretty good at it. A lot of it was just because I was obviously very, very strong for a high schooler. I think I had a lot of carryover. But I thought it was fun to like have something that's more like technically focused, just because I already had all like the physical attributes to be good at it. I just needed to like build technique. So that was like a fun thing to do for a while. Don't look at my numbers, because I also was a gym hero in shot put because my senior year got canceled for COVID reasons.
Also, to give Max credit, had his senior year not been canceled for track and field, Max was good enough to go D1. He wasn't going to be breaking any D1 records, but good enough to throw shot D1. And I think that that's important to note as far as just like general caliber of athlete. I think people will often look down on high-level powerlifters as failed athletes in other sports. When I don't necessarily always think that's the case. It's just specializing in what you're best equipped to do or what you best have the ability to do. That's not to say that high-level powerlifters are on par with high-level athletes in sports where you're actually paid money and have big gene pools of doing them. That's not what I'm saying. So please don't project that onto me. But the idea that all powerlifters are just failed athletes, I think, is a bit mistaken, right? If Larry Wheels hadn't grown up in like the Caribbean or wherever and had some access to organized sports rather than lifting, I'm sure he would have done darn well at whatever he ended up doing. He's not just a failed football player, as the old narrative for fat equipped lifters goes.
If you have any knowledge of shot put, my best with the 12-pound shot was, I think, 64.8 in training. I did like a summer meet and I've thrown over 60. And then with the 16-pound shot, I threw 55.8, I think. Those were my best training bests. So probably shot put, maybe ping pong. I really liked ping pong. All right.
The lore is that Ronnie Coleman was absolutely nasty at ping pong. Just for you, those of you who didn't know, this is like a real myth that like other bodybuilders have substantiated, that he's just disgustingly good at ping pong back in the day. But moving on.
When did you start lifting?
I don't know.
Cool.
I have no idea.
Awesome answer. I started lifting when I was 12 and then started powerlifting when I was 13. If you go back, my first post on Instagram was in 2016, and I built up to like a 3-plate pull. I guess technically I started when I was 12, so what was that, 2015? And if you have, are there any injuries, and what were they, and how did you recover?
So, luckily, my injuries have been pretty minor, just like real quick turnaround stuff. I mean, I've had a bunch of them, as I think anyone who's reached a pretty respectable level of strength has. I used to deal with pretty frequent strains of my rotator cuffs, which I think really influenced how I programmed to really have an emphasis on keeping the shoulders healthy, as that was a chronic issue that I had. I hurt my shoulder pretty bad, not powerlifting, but I was powerlifting by this point, chucking a javelin without knowing how to chuck a javelin. They just threw me into a meet, and I threw that thing as hard as I possibly could, and I threw it like literally end over end, right?
I cannot unscathed.
I got second at that meet.
I threw javelin and I didn't get unscathed.
Good old terrible like D4 high school. You can throw an if you're strong enough, just chuck an end over end javelin, right? Hurt my rotator cuff pretty bad. I had this horrible issue with my front of my hip that stopped me from running for 2 years straight. That I went to like 5 different physical therapists. I got 5 different diagnoses. I got like x-rays. I was told I needed surgery, which is kind of what put me off of physical therapy for a while. I was like, man, if nobody can give me the same answer, this is not exactly much of a science at this point. This is guessing, right? And like, I was told that they're like, oh, you have weak glutes. And I was like, well, I guarantee my glutes are stronger than yours. I was like squatting almost 500. Does your hip hurt? Right? No. Well, this doesn't make any sense to me, right? I guess both of those I got not lifting. I got a little adductor tear at one point, a little bruising on the inside of my thigh, but frankly that wasn't a big deal. It was like a week and a half turnaround for me back to squatting heavy. I guess the current patellar tendon strain that keeps reoccurring is one of my worst injuries. It's kind of plagued me for this past year. I believe I have figured it out for the most part, and it was more so of a issue with my training than it was with like a chronic injury per se. It's just doing the same thing and expecting a different result. Not that that area is so compromised, but just following the basics of rehabilitation, where you're doing the things that involve that joint, the surrounding musculature that don't hurt. Do those often. And as you do those often, you'll find that other things you're able to do again relatively quickly, and introduce those things gradually, right? The things that used to be painful, maybe a leg extension used to be a no-go and all you could do is bodyweight squats. Do bodyweight squats every other day for a month, and then maybe the leg extensions are good. Now you kind of have a leg day. You've got bodyweight squats and leg extensions. You do that for 2 weeks. You say, oh man, lunges are good now. Well, now you kind of have a workout, right? Maybe you start introducing the squats back in. You just follow that basic principle. I guess the problem is doing it too fast or too slow, not necessarily knowing what to do once you kind of have that framework in mind. But yeah, that's how I've dealt with them. Max has hurt himself.
For a long time, the majority of my lifting career, I only had one injury, which was I would tweak my low back, and I would do it very often. And it would shut down my deadlifting for various amounts of time.
Usually it was about 3 down weeks to 4.
Sometimes it would be I could bounce back in a week. Sometimes it would be I would be out for a month from deadlifting. It didn't seem the pain changed how long I was out from training, because sometimes it would hurt awful and I'd be back the next week, and sometimes it would be just a minor problem, but it would just keep sticking around. But yeah, for the first 5 years of my lifting, the only injury I ever had was I just kept tweaking my low back over and over, and we just kept chugging along, and anytime I did it, we would just dial back for however long until it felt good again, and we'd ramp back up. And if I hurt myself, I just ramp back up over and over, because I never got like a diagnosed injury. I don't know what I was actually doing, but we knew if we just gave it a little bit of time off, it would always heal. And then recently, as of last year, I had my first non-back related injury, which was I tweaked my hammy doing a stiff bar deadlift, and I never got an official diagnosis for whatever that was. But that was by far the most long-lasting injury I ever had. It like screwed up my training for a solid like 7 or 8 months. So what we did for that, because that was my first one that wasn't just taking 2 weeks off. Initially we went to 0, doing nothing that made me feel any discomfort, and then we went to just taking the bar on RDLs, and we kind of pushed things a little too fast, and I ended up retweaking it on a squat, and then we dialed back again, and we just built up from a 1-plate RDL and added like 5 pounds a week over and over to just deep RDLs, or adding whatever I could that wasn't uncomfortable, and we kept that pace going for 8 months. Until I was doing comfortable deadlifts again. And one of the big things that we realized was, I think part of the reason I injured myself is we dropped any like stretched hammy volume, because beltless deficit stiff legs had been a staple in my program for like 5 years, and I had very, very strong hamstrings, and we stopped doing them in the favor of more upper back work. But I think from doing that, I had such a hammy dominant pull that when I suddenly wasn't extremely strong in my hamstrings, I went and I hurt myself. So building my hamstrings back up, I think, was a big part of coming back from that. And I think I'm all good now. I'll sometimes still have like a weird knee issue from that. But generally, I'm all good from that. So dropping down and then doing what you can that doesn't cause comfort and trying to build back up. Neither of us are medical professionals. Don't take our advice. Get a diagnosis. Don't sue us, please.
Take my advice.
Take Sam's advice, not mine. I don't have the money to get sued. That was Sam. Things to decrease wrist pain during squats.
Wrist straps.
Bada boom.
Or clamping down on the bar, right? If you have your wrist cocked back, and that's how you prefer to squat, that's fine. But then if you pair a cocked back wrist with upward pressure under the bar, you're going to increase the strain on your wrist. So either stacking the wrist a little bit more rather than back, you bring it here, or we're applying more of a downward pressure into the bar, almost squeezing the back tightness a little bit better, so less weight is being barred in the hand, so there's less force running through the wrist joint. Wrist wraps can help a lot though, or widen your grip.
We only do family-friendly questions here, so sorry, Joni, I can't answer your question. Sam, YouTube questions?
Yeah, we'll run through a couple really quick. This is a long-ass video. How do you like Montana compared to Washington?
I like it. I will say the cold is very bad on my car. I've had some rough mornings. I've had to cut my door open with a key because the door was fully frozen.
The other day, the high for the day was -4 Fahrenheit, which is about -20 Celsius for all the Europe boys.
Insane that you know the Celsius conversion. Or, I don't know if that's close. Call them out in the comment section if that wasn't
I think
right.
it was pretty close. I think it's like 19.
Call them out.
I like it here. The people are chill. It's a little bit slower pace of life compared to like Seattle, Tacoma. I think I'm gonna like it a lot more when we own a house here. I think that's pretty cool. Although shoveling the driveway, the road that we live on is not a road. Legally, it is a trail, right? Which means that we can't get things shipped to our house yet. It's not paved, and we also don't get our street plowed because it's not a street. So we're gonna have to get one of our neighbors or us to put a snow plow on the front of someone's truck and plow our own street. So that's cool.
To clarify, it's a nice house. It's just in the middle of a patch of dirt, which is dope.
Yeah,
it'll get paved one
real
day.
middle of nowhere stuff. But the next one, do you think step loading is a better progression scheme for beginners than simple linear periodization? IMO, it allows for more practice on the lift.
Sounds like a Sam question to me.
All right.
We're looking for mustache growing questions for the
Yeah,
Sam
also,
and
yeah,
Max
if you guys have
Q&A.
stupid questions, this is the place for them. More than happy to answer stupid questions here. Don't put the stupid questions on the ones I do by myself because I'm trying to work my way through as many questions that are somewhat helpful as I can. So if there's a real shitter in there, I don't really know what to do. But as far as this one, no, I don't think it's any better. I don't think it's any worse, right? For those that don't know, step loading is basically building volume at a weight for a couple of weeks on end before you get to graduate to the next weight, rather than adding the same increment each week. As far as that allows more practice, I disagree because linear periodization can have as many sets as you like and it can be capped at a certain RPE, right? It doesn't have to be do 5 by 5 and add weight to the bar each session until you fail. It can be do 5 by 5 and add weight to the bar each session until you hit RPE 9, right? So it's like linear periodization is a very broad model. So to say that it doesn't allow for as much practice, I think is just not using that model to the best of your ability. If you like step loading, I think it can be okay. I will tell you that step loading your primary movements isn't always going to be the most sustainable strategy as you become a higher level lifter. Maybe relying on a slightly more complicated periodization scheme eventually kind of becomes a nicety, maybe not a necessity though. This one's a long question, but we're going to give you a short answer for time. I am built for squats. Long torso, short legs. My deadlift seems very erratic in terms of progress. Sometimes I come in and am able to pull my program number. Then other days with no changes to my training variables, I can't get the weights to move at all. Do you have any programming tips that might make my deadlift more consistent? I pull conventional. My sumo is 75 pounds stronger than my conventional, but I really hate pulling sumo. I mention this as normally I get the recommendation to just pull sumo. Thank you in advance.
So first of all, pulling conventional, very cool. Secondly, initially the first thing that my brain would go to is, I know you said that all your training variables are always the same. Make sure that's true. I think sometimes that we can kind of sleep on like getting all our food in, or like making sure like you're fully recovered for sessions, because I think various amounts of recovery, or like if you're coming in more fatigued for one session, is what can often be the cause of like sporadic sessions. So making sure you get all your food in, get all your sleep in, and come in just going off how you feel. Because like even if you're consistent with your sleep and food, there are still sessions where you'll burn yourself out more. And so, some amount of auto-regulation around that, or being more consistent with your programming, I think can be a big thing. If it's not any amount of fatigue, which would be my first guess. I think it could also be like a technical inconsistency, because I think if you're, I don't know if you're newer, but if you are, I think often, welcome Kirsten.
Scooch over.
This is my girlfriend, Kirsten. Kirsten is drunk.
No, I'm not.
I paid Kirsten,
just be warned.
I paid for Kirsten $45 to rate a bunch of champagne at dinner, so she's pretty drunk. But what I was going to say was that if you're a newer lifter, technical inconsistency can often be the cause for like more sporadic sessions. I know for me, when I was like changing things in my squat when I was early in my training career, that would lead to a lot of like various up and down sessions. So technical consistency and fatigue management would be my two.
Yeah, so I mean, if you're, there's three ways, I think, just off the top of my head, right? Maybe I'd have a better answer for you if I thought about this more. I got three things to come at you with. One, if things aren't moving one week and they are moving another, even if your variables are standardized, the amount of fatigue, especially in your lower back that you're coming into the session with, might be varying, right?
Well,
especially,
that's what I said.
especially if you're built like shit to pull, like I am, built really poorly to pull. Just any hinging motion is wildly taxing on my lower back. So being really clever and tactical with how I manage my lower back fatigue is a necessity to be consistent. Two, if sometimes you're just not able to budge the weight, your technique might be too widely variable, which is pretty understandable if you're built really poorly to pull, right? It absolutely makes sense that technique is more difficult for you. It's difficult to keep it consistent. Actually, I got four. Three is that it's a mental hang-up, right? And some days you're not committing to the pull, which is possible. Don't know you. You might just be like feeling kind of shitty that day, just giving up early in the pull because it feels heavy, a la what Kirsten does. Or I guess the final one is if all of those things aren't true, you're like, no, I am standardizing my variables. Oh, I'm doing a good job coming with the same amount of fatigue. My technique's pretty consistent, and I'm not quitting early. I'm going to be perfectly blunt with you. You're picking really poor numbers. If like you're consistently unable to move the programmed numbers and all of those boxes are checked, you're picking bad numbers. Not every week should be the upper ends of your capabilities, right? You should be able to come in on an off day and still get the volume in for most of a training cycle until the end. Max can misgroove his weights halfway through the block and still have 1 or 2 reps in reserve because the preparation is done somewhat submaximally. You're not as strong, so you won't be able to train as submaximally as Max does and get away with it, but you should be able to complete the sets even if you misgroove, if it's just a standard training week, not a real test of what you're doing. The next one, what do you think about progressive range of motion training? Something like lowering the height on pin squats gradually. Kirsten, go.
I think, unless you're a beginner, then I would not do that.
Even if you are a beginner.
Even if you're a beginner.
No, my thing is, I think if you can't hit depth, then you
You should
can
work on that.
what I'm saying is maybe that's a way to hit depth. Like if you do like a
Well, then you're
box
not
squat to a
practicing-
box
you're
and
not
then lower and
practicing
lower.
hitting
So here's what
That's fair. But
here's
what
what I
if
would
you
tell
can't
you.
hit depth? How can you practice if you can't hit it? Right?
Going through accessories.
Yeah, well, so
Getting more
there's,
flexible and
so there's
Oh,
regression.
that makes sense.
So I'll give you guys context. Kirsten here is going to answer these questions. Kirsten is a beginner lifter, just by the way.
But I listen to Sam all the time, so I know.
So I know everything. I'll tell you that there's better. So if you can't hit depth and you're a beginner, there's better regressions and progressions of the squat, like front loading it, squatting to a box, doing a pin squat range of
That's
motion.
what I said.
Doing a pin squat range of motion progression is not going to be your best bet.
pretty sure that's what
You can
Kirsten
look it up.
That's what I said.
There's lots of progressions on the internet. As far as building strength, no, right? The most difficult part of any raw lift is going to be the bottom, so avoiding the bottom is not a good strategy to increase your max. I think progressive range of motion training is one of those things that sounds super cool, and it's like you're beating the system, you're going to trick your CNS into being stupid strong, and it sounds nice on paper like the old George Lehman progressive range of motion training, but no, in reality, training through a greater range of motion to build hypertrophy, I think it's just inferior to a traditional periodized block of like, hypertrophy 8s, strength 5s, peaking 3s and 1s. I think that's going to outperform a progression scheme where you never get to practice the lift that you want to be good at until the very end of the training cycle. I'm pretty sure that if you're picking good numbers, a traditional periodization scheme is going to outperform it most of the time.
Yeah, when I was 14, I brought the George Lehman program to Sam, and he made a very good point, which was, so you're only doing a deadlift from the ground in the last week of the block. And And I was like, oh, that's a super good point that I've not built any strength in the bottom part of it until the end.
Which is the most important part for raw lifting, right? It's like even if you miss at your lockout in your conventional deadlift, it's because you're fucking up your positions off the floor to get the weight moving. It's because you don't have the strength to maintain your positions off the floor that you're not able to lock it out, right? A lot of the time when you're missing high in the bench, it's because you pressed your shoulders out of retraction into a bad position to get it moving in a range of motion where you lack strength. Not that you're so powerful off the chest and your triceps are weak. And then if you're missing high in a squat, you're a freak. That's cool. You got tons of power out of the bottom. Pretty badass. Usually it means you compromised your position to get out of the bottom on that one too. Generally speaking, that's how it goes. The next one. What is something both of you cannot agree in regards to programming and training?
That's a hard one because most of my opinions are stolen from Sam. I've been coached by Sam for 5-6 years now. And I live with him. So a lot of my opinions I've just regurgitated from him because he's the brains of the brawn as it is. Though I will say, this is kind of a cop-out answer.
Imagine calling yourself the brawn with a sub-5 plate bench.
Hot take from the old man. Your hairline's really.
I should have cut my hair before this.
I was going to say, this is obviously a personal thing, but I find sleep is the most important variable. Sam finds food. That's obviously a personal difference kind of thing. I think the way we both see technique is pretty different. We both have very different technical examples, even if we're taking good leverages into example. We don't have that much that we disagree on, just because I've trained under him. We have very similar ideologies.
Kirsten, what do we disagree on?
I think Sam's training is boring, so that's something we disagree on.
Yeah.
I have to switch it up more, otherwise I get bored and then I get angry.
Yeah, my life philosophy is that success is built by doing the same thing over and over and over with small iterations, regardless of what it is in life. And,
he does the same thing every single day. I think you can say that on your YouTube videos, but nobody's gonna believe you. He eats the same thing for every meal 6 or 5 times a day. 6 times a day, and does the same thing every day.
Kirsten doesn't.
I don't do
That's why she's a beginner lifter. And then, okay, the final question is a long fucking video. How do you think most people should divide their program between main movements and accessories, bodybuilding moves through a block? Max has a good answer for this one because it's how we train Max. Go.
Oh, jeez, put me on the spot suddenly. I would say if we're breaking that up in time, I usually spend the first 40% of my session doing squats, but the majority of the volume because I'm just spending more time resting and thinking about technique and stuff like that. It changes throughout the phase of the block because in the early block I'm spending way less time squatting and way more time leg pressing and stuff.
That's what I wanted you to touch on is that you emphasize your intensity on the accessories early in the block.
Oh yeah. Early in the block, my just squatting is basically just doing the movement and making sure they're technically sound, and then I'm going absolutely ham on leg press. My main squats at the beginning of the block are super easy, and a lot of people will comment 405 for 9 on squats. I could do 150 pounds more than that, and I squat less than you. And I'm yep, that's true because this isn't a maximal set of 9. This is me practicing technique, greasing the groove, maintaining technique, because I'm not someone who can build muscle. I can't have my main hypertrophy movement be the comp movement because my technique falls apart. I think that is a super high level thing to be able to have your main hypertrophy driving stimulus be your comp movement. You have to be such an insanely good technical lifter to get away with that, in my opinion, or a beginner, obviously.
Or Sam. So you're neither. You're not technically proficient or...
Not a lot of hypertrophy on this guy. But so a lot of my intensity and focus in the session is on accessories and building muscle, because in the early block that's the main focus. And then as the block progresses, that transitions over where I'm spending more time on the main movements and there's more intensity and focus into those movements. So the difference is I'm so much more fatigued after doing my top deadlifts on the second to last week of the block than I am on the first week of the block, and so I'm spending less energy on those, and I'm spending more time. So it transitions over the course of the block.
Yeah, so how Max's training structure, 10-week block?
I'm at technically 11 now, because I'm now,
okay.
We added another rest day.
10 microcycle block, right? Because for the rest of you, a microcycle is going to be a week. If you're a big fat guy, maybe it'll be 8 days, right? Like it is for me.
Or a super lean, large guy.
yeah, shredded 300.
You can't see I have
for most of you guys, they're in there. So
You can't see him.
for most of you guys, training microcycles a week. If you're a beginner, it might be actually shorter. Like you might be rinsing, repeating the same 3 days and then rest, and 3 days and rest, right? But for most of you, a microcycle is going to be a week. Max will have a 10 microcycle training block. Usually it'll look something like, hey, that first 4 weeks, the main lifts are higher rep, but really submaximal. So Max can establish kind of what his baseline technique for this training cycle is. Like, this is the best it's going to look on paper. Usually Max gets his shit together later, but on paper, we're keeping the weight so submaximal that Max is doing these pristine squats that, like, hey, if we could just keep this technique across the block, we're in a good spot, or we can just try to limit how much that technique deteriorates as we add weight to the bar. Finishes the squats, because they're super submaximal, has a ton of gas left in the tank, right? Max is not so exotically strong that he could then leave the gym and progress like a really strong athlete. Like, we went to an Andre Milanichev seminar, and that's how Andre trains, right? Is at that point early in the training cycle, he just leaves a ton of reps in reserve and he goes home. And because his set of 8 that he worked up to super submaximally is still 600 pounds, he goes back the next week and he's stronger and he does it again, right? Max is not that strong yet, so he can't do that. So what he does is he uses the rest of the gas that's left in the tank to absolutely kill basically a micro bodybuilding workout. It might just have might have some leg extensions, might have some leg press, maybe after he does his meet and we get to play around with some of his variables in training. We're gonna try pushing some split squats. Just like a micro bodybuilding workout focused on the primary movers of the squat, which could be predominantly the quads and the glutes, maybe the adductors. So he's going to go super hard on those. Halfway through the block, right, we go into, from a hypertrophy phase for the first 4 weeks, we have like a 3-week strength cycle, right? And the strength cycle is debatably the hardest part of the training, because he's working pretty hard on the main movements for like sets of 5-ish, right? Medium reps in reserve, like actual working sets that kind of tire you out, and then has to turn around and continue pushing the hypertrophy work slightly less, but the combination of the two being pretty moderate ends up being, in a lot of ways, the hardest part of a training cycle. And then we enter more of a peaking phase where Max is trying to get really good at displaying what he's built across those last 2 in the form of a single. So usually that'll mean working up to one really high priority top set where both the technique and the proximity to failure the proximity to failure is very low. The technique is extremely important. It's all make or break. So he spends a lot of time warming up to that set, trying to work out any kinks in the motion on the way up. So the main lift suddenly is taking like an hour and a half to get done or some shit, right? And after that, even if he does have a little bit of energy left, not much is being done on the accessories. He still does them to kind of keep the body moving, so that way our volume doesn't randomly fall off a cliff, which usually leads to your joints feeling like shit. But it's kind of just going through the motions with like a reasonable number of reps in reserve. It's kind of like it's like soft training at that point, right? Like if you did your hypertrophy cycle like that, you get nothing out of it. Because we're not trying to drive any meaningful hypertrophy that late in the cycle, it's mostly just to keep the body moving and feeling good, like doing a little bit of back after your bench, just so you feel nice. Not necessarily trying to drive any meaningful hypertrophy in the upper back. That's how it goes across the block. And I think to varying degrees, that's what you could do. And if you're weaker and you find that it doesn't negatively affect your progress, I think that you could get away with deprioritizing your hypertrophy work less, right? So really kind of keeping your bodybuilding work hard across the whole training cycle, because the difference between you and a lifter much better than you, yes, is technique, it's years under the bar, it's lots of food, but most of all, it's muscle mass, right? So we don't want to necessarily stop prioritizing building muscle mass for a third of the block when that's the most important thing to you getting stronger. Whereas there are people with the same amount of muscle mass as Max who lift more weight, so that's not necessarily the limiting factor. So we can get away with kind of last 3 weeks of a training cycle, getting away from building hypertrophy, because we have a big hypertrophy base. We need to work on the sport-specific skill of moving heavy weights. That's all the questions. If you guys have any questions for, I guess Christian can be a part of our fucking shit show that is going to get a name probably before I upload this. Leave them here. I'll toss up a community post beforehand. Hit us up on Instagram, wherever you want to put them. We'll come up with the name for this one. Reminder, what I said earlier. This one's for the stupid questions. You got some shitters you think are just kind of funny? Throw them here. We'll probably answer them. Thank you guys for watching my video. I appreciate you all.
God, this is 35 minutes?